Hey, sweetie, it's Mom. Just calling to check in on you. I know. I just called yesterday. Your father says I'm being ridiculous. Anyway, call me back when you get a chance, okay? We love you, Katie Bug.
That message was left on November 14th, 2016. Katie never called back. She was found 3 days later in her apartment in Columbus, Ohio. 26 years old, former cheerleader, nursing degree, engaged to be married in spring. Cause of death, opioid overdose. The coroner's report listed the primary substance as oxycodone, brand name OxyContin. What Katie's mother didn't know, what nobody outside a Stamford, Connecticut conference room knew at the time. Was that her daughter's death had been anticipated. Not predicted, not feared, anticipated, as a line item in a spreadsheet.
McKinsey Company, confidential client material. Purdue Pharma LP engagement. Document date, March 2017. Slide header, distributor incentive optimization model. Column structure as follows. Column A, distributor identification code, alphanumeric. Column B, OxyContin units distributed, quarterly aggregate, in thousands. Column C, projected terminal overdose events, rolling 12-month forward estimate. Column D, recommended per event rebate, calculated in cents per milligram distributed. Summary recommendation follows. Quote, rebate structure of 44 cents per milligram upon confirmed terminal overdose event represents optimal equilibrium between channel partner incentivization and forward liability exposure management. End quote. Addendum. Model assumes 3.7% annual mortality variance. Recommend quarterly recalibration.
I need you to understand what you just heard. The most prestigious consulting firm on earth, the firm that advises prime ministers and Fortune 500 CEOs, built a financial model that calculated rebates based on how many customers died. Not might be harmed, not could potentially experience adverse events. Projected terminal overdose events. That's the language. Those are McKinsey's words. That is Exhibit 117 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Purdue Pharma.
Quote, McKinsey's own documents demonstrate that the firm was not merely aware of OxyContin's lethality, but actively incorporated projected patient mortality into its commercial optimization recommendations. This conduct represents a fundamental breach of ethical standards governing professional consulting services and potentially constitutes criminal recklessness under Massachusetts law. End quote. Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Superior Court filing, January 21st, 2019.
Sell the Dow Jones now or losing everything.
When those words were read in open court, McKinsey's stock dropped 11% in a single trading day. Partners who had billed $1,500 an hour suddenly couldn't get their phone calls returned. The firm that had shaped American healthcare, American finance, American government, was being compared to war profiteers. But here's what almost nobody reported. By the time that filing became public, the Purdue engagement had been running for 15 years. McKinsey had collected $86 million in consulting fees. 22 partners had rotated through the account. And an exposed internal email would eventually show that as early as 2009, McKinsey consultants knew exactly what they were helping to build.
I raised concerns multiple times. I told my engagement manager, I said, what we're doing here, we're optimizing for addiction. That's what this model does. And he just looked at me and he said, that's not our concern. Our job is commercial transformation. What the client does with our recommendations is the client's business. I should have quit. I know that now. I didn't.
Between 1999 and 2021, 564,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. That is more than every American combat death since Vietnam combined. And buried in the exposed documents, in the emails stamped privileged and confidential, in the PowerPoint decks that were never meant to see daylight, are the fingerprints of the architects. This is the McKinsey Files. Before we go further, you need to understand what McKinsey is. Not what it does, what it is. Because McKinsey & Company is not a normal business. It doesn't operate like one. It doesn't think of itself as one. McKinsey thinks of itself as an institution. Partners don't say McKinsey. They say the firm, capital F, like they're in a Grisham novel. Founded 1926, Chicago. James O. McKinsey, an accounting professor who believed business management could be made scientific, quantified, optimized, stripped of intuition and sentiment. By 2020, McKinsey employed 38,000 people, 65 countries, $10.5 billion in annual revenue. Client list, 90 of the Fortune 100, Apple, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, the Department of Defense, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. When you're that big, when your alumni run that many graduates and corporations, you stop being a company. You become infrastructure. Which brings us to the pharmaceutical practice and to the man who ran it, Martin Elling, senior partner, leader of McKinsey's pharmaceutical and medical products practice, North America. Princeton, class of '86. Harvard Business School, 90. Joined the firm in 1992. If you met him at a fundraiser, you'd think successful, polished, the kind of man who owns a boat he never has time to use and talks about his kids' lacrosse games. His LinkedIn profile, before it was quietly deleted in 2019, described his expertise as helping pharmaceutical clients achieve commercial excellence. Commercial excellence. McKinsey vocabulary, that means one thing: making clients more money. In Purdue Pharma's case, it meant something else entirely. The McKinsey-Purdue relationship began in 2004. To understand why that date matters, you need context. OxyContin had been on the market since 1996, 8 years. And by 2004, the problems were not a secret. 2001, FDA forces Purdue to strengthen black box warnings. 2003, DEA officially classifies OxyContin as a major source of drug diversion and abuse. 2004, Congressional hearings, GAO investigations, newspaper exposés in the LA Times, the New York Times, the Boston Globe. So why, at that exact moment, did Purdue hire McKinsey? The exposed documents would eventually explain. McKinsey & Company, engagement letter. Client, Purdue Pharma LP. Execution date, February 16, 2004. Scope of work as follows. Develop comprehensive commercial strategy to, quote, maximize the full value of the OxyContin franchise within an evolving regulatory and competitive environment, end quote. Key deliverables. 1. Physician targeting optimization framework. 2. Salesforce effectiveness enhancement program. 3. Core messaging strategy refinement. 4. Regulatory risk identification and mitigation protocols. Estimated Phase 1 fees, $4.2 million. Payment terms, net 30. Let me translate. Maximize value in an evolving regulatory environment. The government is paying attention. How do we keep selling anyway? Physician targeting optimization. Which doctors will write the most prescriptions with the fewest questions? Regulatory risk mitigation. How do we avoid getting caught? McKinsey's first major deliverable arrived in June 2004. 68 slides, 17 pages of appendices, full-colored charts and graphs. The title? OxyContin Commercial Excellence Initiative. Most of it was standard consulting boilerplate, market segmentation, competitive positioning, the usual. But on slide 23, buried in the physician segmentation section, was a concept that would become central to the entire opioid epidemic: the super prescriber.
Slide 23, section header, Prescriber Segmentation Analysis, National Scope. Key analytical finding follows. Approximately 6% of primary care physicians account for greater than 31% of total OxyContin prescription volume nationally. Internal designation, high-value prescribers. Alternate designation, super prescribers. Characteristics of super prescriber cohort. Average monthly OxyContin prescription volume, 18.3 times national physician mean. Payer mix, 62% cash or patient pay versus 14% national average. Geographic concentration, Appalachian region, Gulf Coast, Central Florida corridor. Strategic recommendation. Concentrate sales force resources on super prescriber segment. Increase representative visit frequency from quarterly to monthly cadence. Deploy enhanced sampling protocols. Implement tiered physician loyalty program. Target super prescriber retention rate 95%.
What McKinsey had discovered was that a tiny number of doctors were responsible for an enormous share of OxyContin prescriptions. Now, stop and think about who these doctors might be. They weren't oncologists treating terminal cancer patients who genuinely needed pain management. They weren't pain specialists at university hospitals following peer-reviewed protocols. They were general practitioners, family doctors, and in some cases, in documented cases that McKinsey had in their data, they were pill mills, operating out of strip malls, cash only, some with DEA investigations already open. McKinsey's data showed that these doctors' patients were paying cash at 4 times the national rate. You know who pays cash for prescriptions? People whose insurance has already cut them off. People getting prescriptions from multiple doctors. People who are addicted. McKinsey saw that in the data, and their recommendation was not to flag these doctors, not to alert the DEA, not to distance Purdue from obvious bad actors. Their recommendation was to prioritize them. Send more sales reps, more free samples, more loyalty incentives, because they moved product.
Deposition transcript. Witness, former Purdue Regional Sales Manager. Case number 18CV0432, Southern District of West Virginia. Question. Were you provided with lists of high prescribing physicians to prioritize? Answer. Yes, we had lists. We called them the A list or the VIP list. Question. How were physicians selected for these lists? Answer. McKinsey did the analysis. They had prescription data by doctor, by region, by quarter. They identified who the high-volume writers were. Question. Did anyone in your organization raise concerns about the prescribing patterns of physicians on these lists? Answer. Yes. I personally raised concerns about 2 doctors in my territory. Question. What were those concerns? Answer. They were writing volumes that didn't make sense. One guy, a family practice doc in a small town, was writing more OxyContin scripts than the entire oncology department at WVU Medicine. He had lines out the door, cash only. Question. What was the response to your concerns? Answer. I was told to keep calling on them. The direction from regional leadership was, and I remember this exactly, they move product. That's what matters.
They move product. That's what matters. One of those doctors, the one that sales rep flagged, he would eventually lose his medical license after being linked to 43 overdose deaths. McKinsey's segmentation analysis had identified him as a Tier 1 super prescriber. Recommended action? Increase visit frequency. Deploy enhanced sampling program. They wanted more sales reps calling on him. But the super prescriber strategy, as horrifying as it was only the beginning. Because McKinsey understood something fundamental about pharmaceutical sales. Getting a doctor to write a prescription is only half the battle. The other half is making sure the patient actually fills it. And there are systems, safeguards, designed to intervene between a questionable prescription and a bottle of pills. Insurance prior authorizations, pharmacy quantity limits, state prescription monitoring databases. McKinsey called these safeguards weights, guards, and guardrails. And McKinsey's job was to dismantle them systematically.
Slide 31. Section header. Guardrail Identification and Mitigation Framework. Barrier Category 1. Insurance prior authorization requirements. Current state assessment. Approximately 43% of commercial payer plans require prior authorization for OxyContin prescriptions exceeding 30-day supply or 80 mg daily dosage threshold. Recommended mitigation strategy. Deploy patient copay assistance card program. Structure. Purdue covers patient out-of-pocket cost up to $7,000 annually. Patient effective cost, $0. Projected impact. 78% prior authorization bypass rate within 12 months of program launch.
Let me explain what that means. Insurance prior authorization exists for a reason. When a patient's prescription seems excessive, too many pills, too high a dose, the insurance company pauses, asks questions, requires the doctor to justify the prescription. It's a speed bump, a checkpoint, a moment where someone asks, "Is this really necessary?" McKinsey's solution was to pay the patient's cost directly. Insurance says no? Doesn't matter. Here's a card. The pills are free. They calculated and put in a presentation that this would bypass the safety check 78% of the time. They literally built a model to circumvent medical oversight.
Barrier Category 2. Pharmacy-level quantity restrictions. Current state. Certain pharmacy chains have implemented soft dispensing limits for Schedule II controlled substances, triggered at 90 pill monthly threshold. Recommended mitigation. Establish Purdue Preferred Pharmacy Network. Partner pharmacies agree to OxyContin-aligned dispensing protocols in exchange for volume-based incentive payments. Proposed incentive structure. Tiered rebate of 3 to 6% on OxyContin volume above regional baseline.
Volume-based incentive payments. Pharmacies got paid more for dispensing more OxyContin. Not for checking prescriptions. Not for counseling patients on addiction risk. Not for flagging suspicious patterns. For volume.
Barrier Category 3. State prescription drug monitoring programs. Current state. 34 states maintain electronic databases tracking controlled substance prescriptions across providers. These PDMP systems can identify patients obtaining prescriptions from multiple physicians, a practice known as doctor shopping. Recommended mitigation. Segment commercial resources towards states with weakest PDMP infrastructure, lowest prescriber query rates, and minimal enforcement mechanisms. Priority target states for enhanced commercial focus: Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. Strategic rationale. These jurisdictions represent optimal commercial environments due to regulatory arbitrage opportunity.
Regulatory arbitrage opportunity. That is consultant language for these states can't protect their people. Let's take advantage. Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. By 2017, 13 years after McKinsey wrote that slide, those 5 states had 5 of the 7 highest opioid overdose death rates in America. And McKinsey had specifically identified them as priority targets because their guardrails were too weak.
My son was from Huntington, West Virginia. He hurt his back at work, construction, concrete. He was 31. Doctor gave him OxyContin, said it was safe, said it wasn't like the old drugs. 30 pills at first, then 60, then 90. When the doctor finally cut him off, my boy was already gone. I don't mean dead, not yet. I mean gone, the person he was. He found other ways to get it, pills from somewhere else, then heroin because it was cheaper. I found him in his truck, in my driveway. Engine still running. And now I read that some consulting firm sat in a conference room with their charts and their spreadsheets and decided that West Virginia was a priority target. They looked at a map and they saw my son as an opportunity. They didn't know his name. They didn't care. He was just a number in a column.
The documents we've been describing, the superprescriber lists, the guardrail mitigation strategies, the state-by-state targeting, all of it was marked confidential, privileged, attorney-client work product. McKinsey believed these documents would never see daylight. And for 15 years, they were right. But in 2018, something changed. The lawsuits started winning. The subpoenas started flying. State attorneys general began demanding documents. And McKinsey consultants, current and former, received an email. The subject line read, "Document retention policy. Please read immediately." What happened next would trigger a federal investigation into potential obstruction of justice and reveal exactly how far the firm was willing to go to protect itself. In the world of corporate litigation, there is one rule that every executive learns on day one. Never put anything in writing you wouldn't want read aloud in court. McKinsey, the firm that Fortune 500 companies pay millions of dollars for strategic advice, apparently forgot this rule. Or maybe they just didn't think they'd ever get caught. Because what emerged from the discovery process wasn't just evidence of a predatory marketing strategy. It was evidence of a cover-up. July 11th, 2018. By this point, the opioid litigation had become a tsunami. 47 state attorneys general had opened investigations. Over 2,000 county and municipal governments had filed lawsuits. The federal MDL, multi-district litigation, in Cleveland had consolidated more than 2,500 cases. And for the first time, the subpoenas weren't just targeting Purdue. They were targeting McKinsey. On that day, July 11th, a McKinsey senior partner named Arnab Ghatak sent an email. The recipients, every consultant who had worked on the Purdue account going back to 2004. The subject line, document retention, please read immediately. What that email said would eventually be read aloud in the Massachusetts Superior Court.
From Arnab Ghatak, Senior Partner, to Purdue Pharma Engagement Team, Distribution List All. Subject, Document Retention, please read immediately. Team, as you may be aware, litigation surrounding opioid manufacturers has expanded significantly. McKinsey has received preservation notices related to our work with certain pharmaceutical clients. I want to remind everyone of our standard document retention policies. Documents related to client engagements should be retained in accordance with the engagement letter terms and applicable legal hold requirements. However, documents that are not subject to legal hold, including draft materials, working papers, and informal communications, should be reviewed and disposed of in accordance with our standard records management protocols. Please take the time this week to review your files and ensure compliance. Questions can be directed to General Counsel.
Read that again. Documents not subject to legal hold should be reviewed and disposed of. That is a senior partner at one of the most sophisticated firms on earth, telling employees to delete documents while litigation is pending. In legal terms, this is called spoliation of evidence. And depending on the circumstances, it can be obstruction of justice, a federal crime. Now, McKinsey's lawyers would later argue that this email was routine. Standard records management, nothing unusual. But then, prosecutors found the follow-up emails. From name redacted, McKinsey associate, to name redacted, McKinsey engagement manager. Subject, document retention. Quick question, does dispose of mean delete from our drives, or just move to archive? I have a lot of Purdue working files. Some of the early stuff from the super prescriber analysis. Not sure what's covered by the legal hold and what isn't. Advice?
Reply from name redacted, engagement manager. Delete, don't just archive. If it's not on the hold list, get rid of it. The direction from above is to clean house. And don't discuss this further over email.
Delete, don't just archive. The direction from above is to clean house. And don't discuss this further over email. That last line is what prosecutors call consciousness of guilt. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They said so in writing.
Massachusetts Attorney General's supplemental filing, February 4th, 2020. Quote, "The Commonwealth has obtained evidence suggesting that McKinsey personnel engaged in systematic destruction of documents relevant to this litigation. Internal communications indicate that this destruction was coordinated, directed by senior partners, and undertaken with knowledge that the documents were potentially responsive to pending subpoenas. The Commonwealth reserves the right to seek sanctions, adverse inference instructions, and referral to appropriate authorities for potential criminal obstruction." End quote.
Referral to appropriate authorities for potential criminal obstruction. That is a state attorney general formally accusing McKinsey of destroying evidence and threatening criminal prosecution. McKinsey's response was swift and revealing.
McKinsey Company, public statement, February 5th, 2020. We are confident that our document retention practices complied with all applicable legal requirements. McKinsey did not destroy any documents subject to legal hold or litigation preservation obligations. We are cooperating fully with all ongoing investigations and are committed to transparency in this process.
Committed to transparency. Interesting choice of words from a firm that had just been caught telling employees to clean house. But the document destruction was only part of the story. because the emails would prove even more damaging. In late 2019, as the Massachusetts case moved toward trial, prosecutors released a batch of internal McKinsey communications that hadn't been deleted. Emails between partners, strategy discussions, candid assessments of the Purdue engagement. And one email chain in particular showed that McKinsey knew, years before the public outcry, exactly what OxyContin was doing.
From Martin Elling, Senior Partner, to Purdue Pharma Engagement Team. Date, April 14th, 2009. Subject, Regulatory Landscape, Strategic Implications. Team, as we refine our fiscal year 2010 recommendations, we need to acknowledge the shifting external environment. Media coverage of OxyContin abuse has intensified. Congressional attention is increasing. State-level enforcement is becoming more aggressive. Our modeling suggests a window of approximately 18 to 24 months before regulatory constraints significantly impact commercial operations. Recommendation: accelerate near-term volume initiatives to maximize value capture before the window closes. We should discuss mitigation strategies for the inevitable public relations challenges.
April 2009. By that point, OxyContin had already been linked to thousands of deaths. The FDA had already forced multiple warning label changes. Purdue had already paid $600 million in federal fines for misleading marketing. And McKinsey's response was not, "We should reconsider this engagement." Not, "We have an ethical obligation to raise concerns." Not, "Maybe we shouldn't be helping a company that's killing people." Their response was, "We have 18 to 24 months. Let's maximize value capture before the window closes." Let's sell as much as we can before they make us stop.
That email. I saw that email when it came out in the court filings. And I sat there at my kitchen table reading it because I was on that team in 2009. I was a second-year associate. I remember the meeting where we discussed the window. Someone, I won't say who, someone said, "The music is going to stop eventually. Our job is to make sure the client has a chair when it does." And everyone just nodded. I nodded. Do you know how many people died in that 18-month window? I looked it up after the lawsuits. I had to know. 47,000 overdose deaths in 2009 and 2010. That's more than car accidents, more than gun violence. And we sat in a room and talked about maximizing value capture.
By 2020, the evidence was overwhelming. The superprescriber targeting, the guardrail dismantling, the document destruction, the internal emails showing foreknowledge. McKinsey could no longer deny involvement. But they could do something else, something the firm had perfected over decades of crisis management. they could pay and make the problem go away. Before we discuss the settlement, before we talk about the money McKinsey paid to make this go away, we need to stop and talk about the people who aren't here anymore. Because it's easy, dangerously easy, to get lost in the documents, the emails, the legal filings, the corporate strategy. It's easy to forget that behind every data point in McKinsey's models, there was a person with a name, a family, a life that ended too soon. Between 1999 and 2021, 564,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. To put that in perspective, the Vietnam War killed 58,000 Americans over 20 years. The opioid epidemic killed that many every 14 months. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Combined, those conflicts killed fewer Americans than OxyContin and its imitators. And the deaths were not random. Remember McKinsey's priority target states? The ones they identified for enhanced commercial focus because of regulatory arbitrage opportunities? Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. In 2017, West Virginia's overdose death rate was 57 per 100,000. The national average was 22. West Virginia's rate was nearly 3 times higher. McKinsey identified that state by name in writing as a priority target because its guardrails were weak. But statistics are abstractions. They tell us the scale of the tragedy. They don't tell us what it felt like. For that, we have to listen.
Katie was my youngest. When she was little, 4, maybe 5, she used to say she wanted to be a nurse so she could make the owies go away. Make the owies go away. That's what she'd say. She did become a nurse, got her degree from Ohio State, graduated with honors. She was so proud. We were so proud. She hurt her knee at work, lifting a patient. The doctor gave her OxyContin, just gave it to her. Didn't ask about family history, didn't warn her about anything. 90 pills. The first prescription was 90 pills. My little girl, who wanted to make the owies go away, became one of the owies. She tried to stop. She really tried. Went to a clinic, went to meetings. But by then, her brain had changed. That's what the doctors told us later. The drug changes your brain chemistry. You're not the same person anymore. November 17th, 2016. I called her cell phone. It rang and rang. No answer. I drove to her apartment. The manager let me in. She was on the bathroom floor. 26 years old. My baby, my Katie bug. And somewhere, in some office, some consultant looked at a spreadsheet and calculated that her death was an acceptable cost of channel maintenance. They don't get to call her an event. She was my daughter. She had a name. She had a life. She wanted to help people. And they turned her into a number. Column C, projected terminal overdose event. That's my Katie.
Katie's mother testified at a congressional hearing in 2020. She was one of 47 family members who spoke. 47 families. 47 empty chairs at dinner tables. 47 names that will never be called again. But there were others who couldn't speak for themselves. The opioid epidemic didn't kill randomly. It followed patterns, demographics, geographies. 70% of overdose deaths were male, the highest risk age bracket 25 to 44. The highest risk profession, construction workers. Like James, the son of the man we heard from earlier, hurt his back on a job site, given OxyContin, dead in his truck at 32. This was the pattern. Working-class Americans, the people who build houses and pave roads and lift heavy things, were prescribed opioids at rates far higher than white-collar workers. And McKinsey's super prescriber targeting made sure those prescriptions kept flowing. Let's be precise about causation. McKinsey did not manufacture OxyContin. McKinsey did not prescribe OxyContin. McKinsey did not put a single pill in a single person's hand. But McKinsey told Purdue which doctors to target, the ones who would ask the fewest questions, the ones who would prescribe the highest volumes. McKinsey told Purdue how to circumvent insurance limits, how to make the pills free so no one had a financial reason to hesitate. McKinsey told Purdue which states to prioritize, the ones where the safeguards were weakest, where the population was most vulnerable. McKinsey built the machine. They didn't pull the trigger, but they designed the gun, loaded it, aimed it, and told their client exactly where to fire.
You know what gets me? Nobody from McKinsey has ever apologized. $573 million, that's what they paid, to 47 states. You know how much that is per death? About $1,000. That's what my son's life was worth to McKinsey, $1,000. And you know what pisses me off even more? The settlement didn't include, quote, any admission of wrongdoing. They paid $500 million and didn't admit they did anything wrong. That's not a settlement. That's a cost of doing business. That's McKinsey saying, we'll pay you to shut up, but we're not sorry and we're not changing. My boy is dead. Their partners are still getting bonuses. That's America, I guess.
By early 2021, McKinsey was cornered. 47 states had either filed suit or joined investigations. Congressional hearings were scheduled. Former consultants were cooperating with prosecutors. The exposed documents had made international news. For a firm that prided itself on never making headlines, on being the invisible hand behind corporate success stories, this was an existential crisis. On February 4th, 2021, McKinsey announced a settlement.
McKinsey & Company, official statement, February 4th, 2021. McKinsey has agreed to pay $573 million to resolve civil claims by 47 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories related to our past work advising opioid manufacturers. We deeply regret that we did not adequately acknowledge the emerging human tragedy unfolding before our eyes. We recognize that our client, Purdue Pharma, pleaded guilty to federal crimes related to its marketing of OxyContin, and that we should have evaluated our engagement more critically. This settlement does not constitute an admission of liability or wrongdoing. McKinsey has implemented new policies and procedures to ensure that we do not advise clients on potentially dangerous controlled substances in the future.
Let's break that down. We deeply regret that we did not adequately acknowledge the emerging human tragedy. Emerging tragedy? By 2009, when McKinsey was talking about maximizing value capture before the window closes, the overdose death toll had already passed 200,000. This wasn't emerging. This was a 5-alarm fire. And McKinsey brought gasoline. We should have evaluated our engagement more critically. They evaluated it plenty critically. Their own documents show detailed risk assessments, congressional attention, media coverage, enforcement trends. They evaluated all of it and decided the money was worth the risk. This settlement does not constitute an admission of liability or wrongdoing. $573 million. And they still won't say they did anything wrong.
Statement from Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, February 4th, 2021. Today's agreement holds McKinsey responsible for its role in the opioid crisis. McKinsey's cynical and calculated marketing tactics helped fuel a public health crisis that has devastated families and communities across Massachusetts and the nation. This settlement will provide hundreds of millions of dollars for treatment, prevention, and recovery programs in all 50 states. No amount of money will bring back those we've lost, but this agreement sends a clear message. There will be accountability for those who contributed to this epidemic, no matter how powerful they are.
Attorney General Healey called it accountability. But was it? $573 million, divided among 47 states. Massachusetts received roughly $15 million. West Virginia, ground zero of the epidemic, received $12 million. McKinsey's annual revenue in 2020 was $10.5 billion. The settlement represented about 3 weeks of revenue. McKinsey earns that much before Valentine's Day. Two months after the settlement, McKinsey partners were called to testify before Congress. April 22, 2021, House Committee on Oversight and Reform. For the first time, the consultants who had shaped the opioid marketing strategy would answer questions under oath. The hearing room was arranged in the familiar formation. Members of Congress elevated on the dais, witnesses seated below at a long table facing a wall of cameras and questions. McKinsey sent 2 current partners to testify. Martin Elling, the man who had led the pharmaceutical practice, was not among them. He had left the firm quietly in 2019, shortly after the first subpoenas arrived. The most revealing exchange came 90 minutes into the hearing. Congresswoman Katie Porter of California held up a document, a McKinsey slide, the one recommending enhanced commercial focus on states with weak PDMP infrastructure. She read the priority target list aloud: Florida, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee. Then she asked a simple question. Did McKinsey know when it identified these states as priority targets that they had the highest overdose death rates in America? The McKinsey partner paused, consulted with his lawyer, then answered. We were aware of the public health challenges in those regions. Our recommendations were based on commercial opportunity analysis, not health outcome data. Porter's response was immediate. So your answer is yes, you knew. You knew these states had the most deaths, and you told your client to focus there, because the commercial opportunity was best where people were dying the most. The partner did not respond. The hearing lasted 4 hours. It generated headlines, sound bites, expressions of outrage from both parties. It did not generate any criminal referrals. It did not generate any individual sanctions. It did not generate any additional fines. McKinsey's partners answered questions, expressed regret, and went home. The following week, the firm announced a new partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Contract value, $22 million. The machine kept running. Four years have passed since the settlement. The opioid epidemic continues. The deaths continue. So where are the architects now? What happened to the McKinsey partners who built the machine? Martin Elling, the senior partner who led the pharmaceutical practice, who oversaw the Purdue engagement for over a decade, left McKinsey in late 2019. He now works as a senior advisor to a private healthcare investment firm. His LinkedIn profile, restored and updated, describes him as an expert in value creation in complex healthcare environments. He has never been charged with any crime. He has never been individually sanctioned by any regulatory body. He has never publicly apologized. Arnab Ghatak, the senior partner who sent the document retention email that triggered the obstruction investigation, also left McKinsey in 2019. He now leads a healthcare consulting practice at a smaller firm. According to his professional biography, he specializes in navigating complex regulatory environments. He has never been charged with obstruction of justice. The federal referral threatened by Massachusetts never materialized. And McKinsey? The firm paid its $573 million. It implemented new risk protocols for pharmaceutical engagements. It hired a new director of social impact. And then it kept going. In 2023, McKinsey's revenue exceeded $15 billion, a new record. The firm currently holds active contracts with the Department of Defense, the Department of Health and Human Services, the State Department. The settlement, the largest in the firm's history, barely registers on the balance sheet. 3 weeks of revenue, a rounding error, and no one went to prison. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the McKinsey opioid story. It is not primarily a story about bad people. Martin Elling is not a supervillain. He's a Princeton graduate who is good at spreadsheets. The consultants who built the super prescriber models were not sadists. They were young professionals with mortgages and student loans, doing what their bosses asked. The horror of the McKinsey opioid story is that it didn't require horror. It required incentives. It required a system where billing hours mattered more than body counts. It required a culture where commercial excellence was its own justification. It required a world where the smartest people in the room could build a death machine and call it strategy.
People ask me, how could you work a med account? How could you stay? And the honest answer is, it didn't feel like what it was. Day to day, you're not thinking about overdose deaths. You're thinking about deliverables, about making partner, about not being the person who slows down the engagement. There's this culture, at McKinsey especially, but really at all these places. The culture is, we solve hard problems. We don't question the problems, we solve them. The client wants more sales, we figure out how to get more sales. The client wants to bypass regulations, we find the workarounds. You tell yourself, if we don't do it, someone else will. You tell yourself that until you believe it. And then, one day, you're reading a court filing and you see a number. 500,000 dead. And you realize you were part of that. I was part of that.
What accountability looks like for 500,000 deaths. A consulting firm paid 3 weeks of revenue. A pharmaceutical company went bankrupt, its owners protected by a shield of trusts and offshore accounts. A handful of executives pleaded guilty to misdemeanors. No prison time. No McKinsey partner was ever charged with a crime. No McKinsey consultant was ever banned from government contracts. No McKinsey document was ever used to prosecute a federal case. This is how corporate mass death works in America. The bodies pile up, the settlements are paid, the apologies are crafted by lawyers, and the machine keeps running.
I testified at Congress. I testified at state hearings. I've told Katie's story more times than I can count. And every time someone says to me, "Thank you for your courage. Thank you for speaking out." But nothing changes. McKinsey is still in business, still advising the same government that was supposed to hold them accountable. The partners who built those spreadsheets are still working, still getting paid, still going home to their families. My daughter is still dead. So what was the point? I'll tell you what the point is. The point is, someone has to remember. Someone has to say their names. Someone has to make sure that when McKinsey puts out a press release about their commitment to social impact, there's a voice that says, "You helped kill 500,000 people, and you paid a fine, and you kept going." They want us to forget. They're counting on it. I won't forget. Katie Bug, November 17th, 2016. I won't forget.
In 2017, a McKinsey consultant opened a spreadsheet. Column A listed distributors. Column B listed pills. Column C listed deaths. The spreadsheet wasn't a warning. It was a business model. And somewhere tonight, in a conference room with good lighting and expensive coffee, another spreadsheet is being built. Another commercial excellence initiative is being designed. Another client is being told exactly how to maximize value before the window closes. The names change, the industries change. The machine remains. This has been the McKinsey Files.